I'm Dr. Jacqueline Duget, and you're listening to What is Black Podcast, the podcast where we address issues important to raising healthy and thriving Black children and teens. So I am so happy to be back for the second half of season 2. It's been, I've been on hiatus, hashtag summer, if you want to call it a summer. Been pretty busy, spending time with family, friends, work, and also very busy addressing the impact of racism on the health of children and adolescents. I've been busy doing several speaking engagements where I've had the opportunity to either be on a panel with other great experts or to speak directly to parents about how to talk about race and racism given the recent events that have occurred this summer. The protests against police brutality, the protests for social justice, racial justice, and the fight for addressing inequality. Also, we've heard a lot of news about the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, so much more, and recently the death that occurred in Rochester. And the incident with Jacob Blake. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I'm glad that I'm back and can really engage in more conversations about those important topics, but also really talk about ways that we can affirm our kids in light of all the negativity that's going on. And as I've always said, and you may be tired of me saying this, but I love books. And I think they're wonderful tools for us to talk to our kids about important issues. But also, I love the idea of joy, right? And especially in today's episode, we're going to shed light on Black boy joy. We have a special guest today, Michael W. Waters. He's an award-winning author, activist, professor, and pastor. He's also a sought-after speaker, both nationally and internationally. And he's also a frequent social commentator for major media outlets. He was even named one of America's emerging leaders by Ebony Magazine and has received multiple honors for his work in peace and justice. Michael's actually written a wonderful picture book inspired by real life events. So it does, there's a through line, I think, for the rest of this season back to the events that have occurred earlier this year. And it's a story of a boy named Jeremiah and his family who discovers hopeful forms of activism and advocacy in response to the gun violence in their community. The book even includes a discussion guide by the Muhammad Ali Center, and a portion of the publisher's sales proceeds will be donated to this organization. So I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation with Michael as we talk a little bit more about his book and his work. So we're going to talk about For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World, which is coming out September 22nd, and has also been featured in Essence magazine. So I think it's a really good read, and I've also had the opportunity to read the book. So let's get into the interview, and I hope you enjoy it. So Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Well, I'm deeply delighted to be with you. Thank you so much.
So as I shared in the introduction, we're going to focus today on your upcoming picture book, For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And, prior to our conversation, I was mentioning to you, you packed so much into this lovely book. So wanted to get in, of course, I think one of my first questions when I talk to authors is always, what is the inspiration and the story behind the book For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World?
Well, for us, our inspiration was our beautiful Black boy named Jeremiah. As I write in my author's note and still believe to this day, he's the most beautiful Black boy that I've ever laid eyes upon. And receiving the privilege of being his father has been life-changing. And I've been grateful for the lessons learned and the opportunities to grow alongside him. There's an old saying that when a child is born, a father or a mother is born at the same time. And I believe that I can trace back, if you will, this part of my life, the ways in which I engage and consider things in the world, to the time that I was privileged to become his father. Now, the story itself comes from our experiences with race and racial violence and gun violence, our observations of the world over the last several years. So, this is a story that is rooted in our experience, and that was the inspiration for the book.
Now, I totally agree with you. I also have two Black sons. And, when they're born, right, you really don't want to think about how race is going to impact them, right, as they grow up. But unfortunately, right, in our, you can't help but separate the two. And so again, just thinking back to those hard conversations and topics, right? Racial violence, police violence, racism. How were you able to think about how to construct a narrative about those difficult topics, but put it in a picture book form? Like what was that process like for you to even to go from a thought, these difficult concepts, and then have it written for a child to understand?
Well, the great James Baldwin talked about the fact that there comes a time in the life of a Black parent where they become aware of the fact that they are powerless to shield their Black children from the experience of racial discrimination. He puts it around the age of 30, when you recognize that you're unable to shield them from all the experiences that you have had yourself, which then necessitates the importance of preparing them with as much information as you can provide them, as much knowledge as you can provide them, for how to interact and move in a world that does not always celebrate and honor their beautiful Blackness. And so that was really our opportunity and even our challenge to attempt to cultivate in the mind first of this young Black man a sense of security, a sense of power that will enable him to negotiate this world ultimately as a Black man. And a part of that are lessons that are given very early that you well know, raising sons as well, about how they are to move when they are in a grocery store or in some other retail setting, to always get a receipt, because you never know between the time you make a purchase and the time you attempt to make an exit, whether someone will accuse you of stealing. Some of the other interesting things that we teach our young men in particular, that other parents don't necessarily have to teach their children as a means of survival. So really this book, and there is a lot here because it comes from our experience. It comes from the various encounters that we have had viewing acts of racial violence and racial hatred in the media, things happening within our neighborhood and in our community, and even because of the work in which I'm engaged and the work in which my wife is also engaged, being on the front lines of movement and justice, the things that they have been made aware of because they are our children. And so all those things came together. And to tell you exactly how it came together, I was on a flight to Los Angeles to speak at a conference, and sitting there in that airplane seat, began thinking about a conversation that I had recently had with our son after the death of a young man by the name of Jordan Edwards, who was shot and killed here near Dallas. This young Black brother, Jordan Edwards, was sitting in a vehicle that was of no threat or any harm to former Officer Roy Oliver, and yet he still shot his gun indiscriminately into that car where Jordan Edwards, his brothers and cousins were. The bullet struck him in the head and he died. I was asked, as I'm frequently asked, to speak at the vigil alongside the family in his hometown of Balch Springs near Dallas. And our son was there, and that's not unusual for him to have been present with us in that type of setting. But I believe that because Jordan was closer in age to our son, Jeremiah, at the time, that it made a major impact on him, more so than some of the other incidences that he was aware of. And when we got home, Jeremiah was about 10 years old at the time. He came in our bedroom as we were retiring for the night, and he began a series, a litany of things that he was tired of. He said, I'm tired of people killing each other. I'm tired of people hurting each other. I'm tired of people not liking one another because they're different or the color of their skin. And that then began a conversation that my wife and I held together with him. And that conversation was still on my mind as I boarded that plane. And before I knew it, I was taking pen to paper. And after a few moments, I looked up and felt that there was something there that would be helpful to share with the world.
But I find, and thank you for sharing that the background for the book, as well as the answer to my question, because I find, I find what you're saying, like what really resonated to me. Everything resonates, but when you mentioned your son Jeremiah coming into your room, around bedtime, I mean, though I find that even with my youngest son, right, as he's grown up, right, his teenage years, those have been like some of the most pivotal times we've had conversations, right? So he'll come in after he witnessed something at school, at a sport event or something, or just something else throughout the day, right? Weighed on him. And as he's processing it, it's that right before bed conversation. And then it's like, it makes you kind of like, you know, it's haunting in a way, right? Because after you leave, you start to realize, oh my God, like what he's been thinking about, right? And how that's affected him. And the fact that you're able to then take that conversation to sort of gift other parents as well, who will more than likely have these conversations. It may not always be at nighttime, but these conversations are going to come up, right? And when I know for me it's been difficult, right, to have these conversations, I'm just imagining, right, you had a 10-year-old where you're having this conversation, and I've had maybe some more intense conversations as my son has gotten older, and maybe you as well. But even as kids are witnessing um, more deaths, right? More news reports, witnessing, more acts of violence, right? Um, what's so nice too is that you weigh that, right? It's not just talking about racism, right? It's also the process of how do we deal with it? How do we stand up to it? And if you could talk a little bit more about that, that whole continuum, right? So you have your kids kind of, they're concerned about these issues, they're worried about these issues, they want answers. And then how as a parent, and through the story, how the parents sort of help the main character sort of find answers to these questions, and really not just dwell on them, right? But there were opportunities to stand up against racism.
Absolutely. And my son is very much so like myself. We take in a lot of information, process it, and then release it. And so I was not surprised that after, all the things that he has seen and witnessed and his pondering those things, that he'd come to the point where he was ready to share. And I think the first important thing about the ways in which my wife and I have sought to parent is to not to always attempt to force a conversation, but to be ready and present when the conversation is time to be held, when the child is ready to really to speak more to what their concerns are, to be present, to be proximate, but not to attempt to force the issue. And we've discovered more often than not that our children, I think based on the relationship that we have with them, when they get to the point really where they're ready to talk, they know that they can come and speak with us. We have a very unique experience with our children as well. I want to acknowledge that my wife is a leader in the criminal justice reform movement, doing great work in that space. And so they've gotten a very up close and personal view of the criminal justice system and what is necessary to bring about true justice for our communities. They've seen me in the streets protesting at rallies, at marches, press conferences, interviews, that they've had a very unique experience with us. And so I know that they've been very close to leaders in the movement, both civil rights leaders all the way forward, had those conversations. And our main purpose in that is to expose them to the realities of the world. We did not want them to have a falsified sense of security, unaware that there are very real threats to your person, even as a young child, that they had to have an awareness of these things, knowing that we would do the best that we could do as their parents to provide security and support, but also understanding that they needed to have an awareness of the world, which is not, frankly, not too different from my upbringing. And I came of age really during the 90s. And, in the community in which I lived in, there was drug violence, there were gangs or other things of that nature, but there was also racial discrimination. And so you had to learn some lessons very early in order to survive, in order not to move in the wrong way. And I think that's still true, particularly for Black and brown children. I think some people may have a false sense of security for their children because of some kind of economic achievement or where they live. And we know very well that respectability politics is not enough to preserve the safety of your child or even of yourself. You can be bird watching in Central Park and still have the threat of violence brought against you. So I think it's important that we prepare our children, that we have very honest conversations with them about the ways in which the world works. Even with our youngest child, as we were driving around, we began lessons related to redlining at a time when most people are not having those type of conversations, and we were having those conversations in a way in which a child can understand. And I think we also have to recognize the capacity and agency of children. They are many times wise beyond their years and are already discerning things about the world even before we have a conversation. And so when we talked about redlining, you don't necessarily have to use that term right off, but they know, it's very interesting when we're on this side of town, there are an abundance of restaurants and of movie theaters and of other opportunities. But when we're on this side of town, those things are lacking. They're already observing these things. They're already observing that, there's this daily gunfire at night outside our home. Why is there always shooting in the community? What's going on? And why doesn't this happen in other places within our city? They're already beginning to contemplate those things, and we just need to somewhat invite ourselves to journey with them to the point that they're ready to have that deeper conversation. But we also, I think it's imperative that we give them a sense of hope, that we connect our narrative to the narrative of struggle that has gone on in this nation for centuries, and those who have moved forward progress, sometimes with great sacrifice, but nonetheless moved forward progress for the benefit of us all. And so we've also had the joy of personally introducing them to individuals, as well as reading materials and viewing documentaries, so that they can have an understanding that when people who are dedicated and focused towards changing the world journey in that regard, oftentimes they find that the world is changed by their sacrifices.
I'm excited to welcome our new sponsor, Puzzle Huddle. Puzzle Huddle creates puzzles that feature diverse Black characters. They believe that when children play with toys that feature images that look like them, they have the opportunity to be affirmed and engaged in imaginative play in a very personal way. And I believe this brand really supports the mission of What is Black to help raise healthy and thriving Black children through play and seeing themselves reflected back in the toys that they play with. These puzzles are also a great excuse to play together as a family. One of my favorite puzzles is Ballerina Love that I'm looking at right now. I was excited to unpackage it and actually put the puzzle together. It features a beautiful brown girl dancing. I'm ready to frame it and put it on my wall. It's that good. But there are so many other wonderful choices featuring characters that are doctors, which I love because I'm a pediatrician, scientists, and so much more. Buy your puzzle today. Check them out at puzzlehuddle.com. So I'd like to focus a little bit on that word joy that you mentioned, right? Because I'm seeing a lot of like a counter narrative to the struggle, this this mention of joy, right? Black joy, or just joy in general. And so that stood out for me in your response to that question. And I was just wondering what your take is on why it is important, right, to have joy in this movement as well as the struggle.
Everything related to Black life in America, I think, would be impossible without joy. I mean, everything we do is an act of resistance. Black love is a resistance. Raising our children to love themselves is an act of resistance. Celebrating our inherent beauty, having communion with God, despite what others suggest, trying to deny us our full right as children of God. The music, the dance, artistry, creativity, poetry, even resistance. All those things are part of our joy. And so, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. In fact, I think I see them as essential. I see joy as an essential aspect of our journey, whether it was our forebears who, even under the whip of slavery, stealed away to hush harbors and were able to connect with God and to find joy and exuberant praise. Whether it was during the days of the lynching campaigns here in America, and yet you still had the tremendous artistry that arose from the blues and from jazz and from the Harlem Renaissance to the second Harlem Renaissance, or the second Black Renaissance, I like to call it, that happened around the late 80s through the 1990s, the Spike Lees and the classic era of hip hop. We've always found a way to take the pains of the world and to feel them. I mean, we've not had a falsified sense of the threats around us, but we still found the power to infuse into some of those desperate places joy. And that's been our superpower as Black people. I think that's why Black culture is celebrated and known all over the world. And I think that's why people connect to our story, because it is a continuous story of overcoming evil with good. It's a continuous story of pressing forward despite everything pressing back against you. There's a Greek word called dioko, and there's a biblical passage that talks about pressing toward the mark. And dioko is the word that is used there. And dioko means to press back against everything that presses against you. And I think that has been the inheritance of Black people. We've always had a press back, and that press back has often been centered in this sense of joy. I mean, even the ability to sing hopeful songs during the days of the civil rights movement while they were in the back of paddy wagons or while they were in jails. And even the jailers were telling them, shut up, be quiet. And every time they tried to quell their voice, the voices rose with even greater power. So yes, I find joy in movement. I find joy in struggle. There's something powerful and beautiful about a people who won't give up. And I hope that we are effective in sharing that story with our children.
Oh yes, I agree. And I think, over the last couple of weeks, I've really been um, focusing on even the power of words and the power of story, right, in books, right. Now I'm into, I'm listening to a lot of Toni Morrison interviews, and like the one thread, right, the through line for me is that history, going back to our denial, right, initially when Black people were enslaved, we were denied reading, right, denied writing, denied that access to literacy, and how books and these powerful authors that you referenced, James Baldwin, right, they, in their words there's power.
Absolutely.
And so again, those things are just resonating with me as you were talking. And again, it wasn't a prepared question, but again, I was just thinking about it. Like, what are your reflections on your ability to write this story and that connection to power, struggle, joy, and really educating young people and opening up those conversations?
Well, I think a part of it comes with a sense of responsibility. I'm a father, I'm a pastor, and I think of the young people who are part of our congregation. I'm the son and grandson and great great grandson of powerful men and women who contributed greatly in their own way to our society. I think about my grandfather who grew up in the fear of the Klan and was nearly lynched himself as a young man, who over the trajectory of his life began breaking down all sorts of barriers, becoming an educator, becoming a county judge and a county commissioner, even in the face of great racial discrimination. And so I always ask the question, given what others have given to me, given the sacrifices of the generations that have come before us, what is our responsibility so that we can make contributions to the generations who are coming behind us? So I see this as a part of a kind of an ongoing narrative, an ongoing legacy of responsibility that each generation seeks to work in their own generation to make the world better for the generation that is following behind. And I hope that's something that we are accomplishing. And one of the ways in which we do that is through books, by telling stories, by uh, providing information, by educating our people. And for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world, I think it's an opportunity to do that. And I've been very encouraged by your response and responses of others who have read the book and who have found inspiration and found strength through the story, that strength to make a difference in their own time. And also try to lift up the fact in the book that you don't necessarily have to wait to become an adult before you can make contributions. There are things that even children can begin contributing to their world right now. And in fact, I think there are children who are ready to do something. Again, we should never underestimate the agency and capacity of children. There are children who are looking at things in the world and they are frustrated by them. They know that there must be something better. And there are ways right now that they can contribute towards making the world that they ultimately desire to inherit. And whether it be, writing letters to elected officials, whether it be showing up in protests, and many young people, even in the midst of this pandemic, were alongside their parents and other trusted individuals in the midst of protests. Whether it's doing such things, in their school when it's safe for them to go back to school, to make sure that persons are not bullied, that people are not ignored. There are things that children already have in their mind to do. And I think the greatest hopes, frankly, that we have for our world is the young people who are coming up at this time, who are gaining a great awareness of things at a very early age, but not just an awareness of things. There's a fire that is being birthed in them to be a part of the change. So again, I think that's part of the reason why it was illegal for us to read, while literacy was made illegal for Black people, because those who would have kept us eternally in bondage knew that there's something powerful that can be unleashed when you read, because it's more than just words on a page. It's thoughts of resistance, thoughts of power. It expands your awareness of the world. It connects you more deeply to your God, and it has the capacity to thrust you forward in your work.
How relevant it is now, because I know the book was written before all the events of this summer. How are you feeling? How is your family feeling about the book and its relevance now?
Unfortunately, having been a part of this work for some time, I know that we're often just buying time between the next hashtag. The reality is that this suffering is relatively ongoing within our nation. And there are people who are always suffering great harm, whether it be at the hands of police or racial violence in general. And there are many names that unfortunately we may never know, uh, but are still known well to the families who lost loved ones. So it was not surprising for me that this book would still have relevance. Of course, I could have never imagined that we would, one, be in a global pandemic, And then we would see these incidences of violence, racial violence, police violence, from Ahmaud Arbery to Breonna Taylor, for whom we're still demanding justice, to George Floyd, and then the revelation of what happened to Elijah McClain even earlier still. I think the way I feel is I feel that this book is providential in the sense that it's a prepared text and resource that is needed right now. And, really as things began breaking open behind the horrific death of George Floyd, I received contacts from all over, from leaders, teachers, parents, wanting to know how do I share this with our children? Some with children, and this is their first time really having to explain, what's going on in the world. And I wished at the time that the book was right in their hands. But we were able to go ahead and release the study guide and activity guide early for free download, along with the coloring sheet, to at least provide parents and other trusted adults something that they could use at this time. But I know that part of the success it experienced so far, people have really been supporting the book, is because there's such a hunger and desire to receive it. Last night, I did my first advanced reading with the school here in Dallas, a boys' school, all boys' school, and they made the determination to buy a copy of the book for each one of their students. And I was reading the text to the parents and students that were online, and the curiosity, the amazement, the wonder in the eyes of the young men on that call was mesmerizing for me. It was really a gift to see how these images and words appeared to be pouring water on a dry place in their lives. They just seemed to be soaking it up. And also looking at the eyes of their parents who, a couple, there appeared to be tears welling up in their eyes. And I think the tears were of relief, in the sense that they've been struggling to have these conversations, struggling to know what to say. And here was a resource that their children were connecting to. And it was one that they knew could help them in having the conversation. And that was a very beautiful thing I'll never forget. My prayer is that everyone who will engage this text with a child will find a similar experience. They'll find that it answers or begins to answer the questions that that young person has, and helps them to have further conversations about the world, but ultimately leaves them with a sense of hope and knowing that they too can be a part of the change that is needed.
Oh, it's been a wonderful conversation, Michael. So before we end, if you could share with our listeners what they can learn more about you, about the book for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world, and also the guide and color, activity sheets as well that accompany the book.
Absolutely. I'd love to remain connected. You can find me online at michaelwwaters.com. All my social media links are there, and an opportunity for you to contact me directly as well. Would love to remain connected. You can find a link for Beautiful Black Boys right there on the website, or you can go to Flyaway Books, which is the publisher. At Flyaway Books, you'll find the links to the download for the discussion guide, the activity guide, as well as the coloring sheet. And I pray that as you download the material and as you purchase the book, tweet me. Hashtag is beautiful for Beautiful Black Boys. Hashtag for Beautiful Black Boys. I'd love to know how you are engaged in the book, how your young people are receiving the book, and anything I can do to support your efforts.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for joining us today.
It was my great privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening to What is Black podcast. And I want to again thank our special guest, Michael W. Waters, and his sharing such great, information and advice, as well as sharing the inspiration for his new picture book for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts. Share with your friends and family. To catch up on past episodes, if you're a new listener, you can go to www.whatisblack.co. You can also check out our blog site, as well as sign up for our newsletter. And follow us on social media. We're at What is Black, WHATISBLK. And we look forward to having conversations with you and getting your feedback about this episode, prior episodes, and what more you'd like to see on the podcast. So until next time, I'm wishing you peace, wellness, and joy.